The archive room on Sublevel 2 of the United Earth Research Division smelled like recycled air and old coffee. It always did. Laura Voss had stopped noticing the smell years ago, the same way she had stopped noticing the hum of the ventilation fans overhead or the faint vibration that came up through the floor when the freight elevator ran. She sat at the long table in the center of the room with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at the wall of data in front of her the way a person looks at something they have memorized so thoroughly it no longer feels like looking. There were 164 entries on that wall. Each one was a civilization. Not a planet, not a colony, a whole civilization. Species that had developed language and mathematics and the ability to reach beyond their own gravity wells and find neighbors in the dark. Some of them had been young when it happened, barely out of their home systems. Others had been old. Ancient networks of worlds connected by shipping lanes and treaties and hundreds of years of shared history. It did not matter. Young or old, large or small, peaceful or armed. The result was always the same. They went quiet, not destroyed, not defeated in battle. There was no radiation bloom, no debris field, no final distress signal cut off midward. The monitoring equipment that detected their last moments showed normal energy readings right up until the readings simply stopped. Communication channels closed, not with static, but with silence. Ships vanished from tracking systems without any of the signatures that go with an explosion or a collision. The word the scientific community used in papers and briefings and careful official language was disappearance. Laura had a different word for it, but she had learned to keep that word to herself in professional settings. She pulled up the 43rd entry on her data slate. A species called the Dareth, from a binary star system 1,400 light-years from Earth. They had been in contact with the Galactic Monitoring Network for 60 years before it happened. Their last transmission was a recording of what appeared to be a festival. Music and lights, and a large crowd gathered in an open plaza under a violet sky. The transmission cut off 8 seconds before the monitoring stations lost all signal from their entire system. Not one ship, not one relay beacon. Everything. Laura set the slate down and pressed the tips of her fingers against her eyes. She was 44 years old. She had been looking at entries like this one since she was 22, when she was a graduate student at the Orbital Research Station above Titan, and the thing that had been happening to alien civilizations across the galaxy had happened to someone she knew. Her father's name was Dale Voss. He had been a survey geologist on the deep space vessel Anchor Point, a mid-sized science ship contracted to chart mineral deposits in a region of space called the Praxis Belt. The Anchor Point had a crew of 31. Laura had spoken to her father by long-range comm 4 days before the ship vanished. He had been telling her about the food. The ship's cook was experimenting with a new recipe for something that was technically a stew, and her father's opinion of it was not high. He had made her laugh. He always made her laugh. And then, 4 days later, the Anchor Point stopped responding, and every monitoring station in range reported the same nothing that 164 civilizations had reported before it. The official investigation lasted 2 years and concluded that the vessel had most likely suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Laura had read the report when she was 24. She had read it 3 times. Then she had set it aside and started building her own theory. 22 years later, she was fairly certain she was right. The door at the far end of the archive room opened, and Patrick Seward came in carrying 2 mugs of coffee and a look that said he had been awake too long. He was a few years older than Laura, with gray starting to come in at the sides of his dark hair, and he walked with a slight lean to the left that he had never had corrected because he claimed to have forgotten it was there. He set one of the mugs in front of her and dropped into the chair across the table without ceremony. "You've been down here since 4, he said. "I know. It's almost 7. I know that too." He looked at the wall of data, then back at her. The resonance model finished its latest run about an hour ago. "You're going to want to see the output." Laura picked up the mug. The coffee was too strong, which was how Patrick always made it, and she did not mind. "Good news or complicated news?" "Both," he said. "Mostly complicated." She had built the resonance model over the course of 15 years, refining it every time new data came in from monitoring stations, calibrating it against the records from each of the 164 disappearance events. The model was built on a single central idea, that whatever was causing entire civilizations to vanish was not random, and not natural, and not a coincidence. It was leaving a trace. The trace was small, incredibly small, a faint distortion in the quantum structure of local space-time that decayed over time but was detectable in the early years after each event. Laura called it a resonance echo. The galactic science community called it background noise and artifact data. Laura had spent a considerable part of her career being told that what she was detecting was interference from nearby stellar events, and that the apparent pattern was a product of confirmation bias, and that she should perhaps consider broadening the scope of her research into areas with more measurable outcomes. She had not done that. The echo at every single one of the 164 sites had the same frequency. Not similar, not close, identical, down to the fourth decimal place, adjusted for distance and elapsed time. And the frequency matched a signal her father had transmitted in the last coherent data packet from the anchor point. Not in the main communication log, but buried in the raw sensor telemetry, a burst of quantum field distortion that the official investigation had flagged as instrument malfunction. It was not instrument malfunction. She followed Patrick up 2 floors to the main lab, where the resonance model was displayed across 4 large screens. The output from the latest run was a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with each of the 164 disappearance sites marked in pale blue. From each site, a thin line extended outward, the projected trajectory of the resonance echo's source, traced backward through space and time using the decay rate and the known direction of the distortion. All 164 lines converged on the same point. The point was moving. "It's a fleet," Laura said. She had suspected this for 3 years, but seeing the convergence, this clearly still made something shift in her chest. Patrick sat down at his console and pulled up the trajectory data. Based on the timing of the events and the speed of the convergence point's movement across the map, I've run the projection forward. He hesitated. "How long?" she asked. He turned to look at her. 7 months. Laura looked at the screens for a long time. Outside the lab's narrow window, the early morning sky over the research division's campus was just beginning to go from black to gray. A few lights were on in the building across the courtyard. Normal morning. Normal world. 7 months, she said. Give or take 3 weeks, depending on whether they maintain their current approach vector or adjust. They won't adjust, Laura said. They never adjust. They fly straight to the target. They've never had a reason to do anything else. She was right about that. In every one of the 164 events, the monitoring data, where it existed, showed the same approach pattern. Direct, unhurried, no scouting ships sent ahead, no probing attacks, no attempt to assess defenses first. Whatever was coming simply came, and when it arrived, the disappearances began. "I need to talk to Holloway," she said. Patrick's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. Admiral Gene Holloway was the commander of Earth's orbital defense grid, and he was a man who had a strong and well-exercised preference for information that came with a clear chain of institutional endorsement. Laura's research was published, peer-reviewed, and largely ignored. Holloway had read exactly one of her papers, according to his office's public reading list, and had not commented on it. "I'll set up the meeting," Patrick said. The meeting happened 3 weeks later, in the large briefing room on the 14th floor of the Earth Defense Authority building in the city. There were 11 people around the table, including Holloway and 3 members of his command staff, 2 government science advisors, and a representative from the Interstellar Relations Office. Laura stood at the front of the room with her data on the screens behind her and presented her findings with the same flat, careful tone she always used when she was saying something she knew people did not want to hear. She told them about the 164 disappearances. She told them about the resonance echo and the identical frequency at every site. She told them about the convergence point and the trajectory and the timeline. She told them that whatever had erased 164 civilizations from the galactic record was 7 months away from Earth, and that it was almost certainly not a natural phenomenon. Then she told them about the weapon. She did not call it a weapon at first. She described it as a dimensional displacement mechanism, a technology that operated by folding local space-time along a fourth-axis seam, creating a temporary pocket outside the normal structure of the universe into which matter could be transferred. Not destroyed, not vaporized, transferred. The matter still existed, she explained. It was simply no longer in the same space. The pocket dimension that contained it was structurally stable for very long periods, which meant that whatever had been displaced was effectively frozen in the moment of its displacement, alive but suspended, unable to interact with normal space. There was a silence around the table when she finished. Holloway leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is deciding whether to be polite or direct. He chose direct. Dr. Voss, what you're describing sounds a great deal like a theory. A detailed one, but a theory. Yes, she said. That's correct. And your evidence for this threat being imminent is a pattern in quantum field data that the majority of your field has assessed as artifact noise. Also correct. Then you understand why I can't restructure Earth's entire defensive posture based on this. I understand why you won't, Laura said. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to authorize continued research funding for my division and to make this briefing part of the official threat assessment record. Holloway looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the screens. Then he looked at his hands. The funding is manageable, he said. The threat assessment record is something I'll consider. It was not a yes. It was also not quite a no. Laura gathered her materials and thanked the room and took the elevator back down to the ground floor and stood on the steps outside the building in the early autumn air. Patrick was waiting for her at the bottom of the steps. Well, he said, he's going to increase missile batteries and scramble additional fighter wings, she said. He hasn't announced that. He will. That's what you do when someone tells you something is coming and you don't believe them, but you're not quite sure enough to completely ignore them. You prepare for the threat you understand. She started walking toward the transit station, which is fine. We don't need him to believe us. We need him to stay out of the way. Patrick fell in his step beside her. The mirror, he said. The mirror, she confirmed. They had been quietly building it for 3 months already, in sub-level 4 of the research division, using the discretionary budget that came with Laura's departmental grant and components that Patrick sourced through academic procurement channels by describing them as laboratory equipment for spatial field studies, which was technically accurate. The mirror was not a weapon. Laura was very clear about this to herself and to Patrick, though she did not describe it to anyone else because there was no one else who knew about it. It was a reflector, a quantum resonance mirror, constructed from a lattice of synchronized emitter nodes arranged in a precise geometric pattern, designed to intercept the resonance frequency of the displacement mechanism and redirect it along its own carrier wave. The theory was elegant. The engineering was extremely difficult. The problem with the mirror was that the displacement mechanism, as best Laura could model it, fired as a single coordinated burst across multiple emitter points simultaneously, which meant the mirror had to be perfectly synchronized to catch the entire burst at once, or the portion it missed would still be enough to fold the target. And perfectly synchronized meant all 7 primary emitter nodes had to be online and calibrated at the same moment, which was a harder problem than it sounded, because 3 of the 7 nodes required components that had never been manufactured for this purpose and had to be adapted from equipment designed for something else entirely. 5 months passed. Laura stopped going home. Not in a dramatic way. She still used her apartment, still slept in her own bed, still made food in her own kitchen on the rare evenings when Patrick forced her to leave the lab. But her actual life, the part that felt real and occupied her thoughts, was entirely in sub-level 4. She spent her days and most of her nights either running calibration tests on the emitter nodes or refining the resonance model or reviewing the data from the monitoring stations that were tracking the approach of what she had started in the privacy of her own notes, calling the fleet. She thought about her father more than she had allowed herself to in years. It was a strange thing about grief she had found. If you gave a project, it would cooperate with you. It would sit quietly in a corner of your mind and wait while you worked. It would not bother you. It would let you build a career and publish papers and maintain a professional reputation and have normal conversations with normal people about normal things. But it never actually left. And sometimes late at night in the lab, when the ventilation fans are the only sound and the emitter nodes were humming at low power, and Patrick was asleep in his chair with his head at an uncomfortable angle, Laura would find herself looking at nothing in particular and thinking about a man who told bad jokes about ship food and who, somewhere in the math she had built her life around, might still be waiting. She did not let herself follow that thought all the way to the end. Not yet. The 6th month brought 2 things. The first was that the monitoring network confirmed what the resonance model had predicted. The convergence point was now close enough that 3 separate deep-range stations had independently detected what they were describing as an anomalous energy signature moving through the outer regions of the solar system's detection envelope. The stations filed their reports through the standard channels. The reports worked their way up through the bureaucracy. Holloway received them on a Tuesday and called Laura directly for the first time. "The stations are seeing something," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been tracking it." There was a pause. "How long have you known?" "About the stations?" "Since this morning." "About the object itself?" "About 22 years." Another pause, longer this time. "The mirror you've been building in sublevel 4, he said. "How close is it to ready?" She had not told him about the mirror. She did not say this. "We need about 6 weeks. You have 4. "Then we'll have 4, she said, and ended the call. The second thing the 6th month brought was Lieutenant Cora Wentworth. Cora was 28 years old, had been posted to Earth's primary orbital station for 14 months, and was working the early watch of the tactical bridge when the anomalous signature cleared the outer sensor threshold and became something she could put numbers to. She was the kind of officer who wrote things down before she said them out loud, and she wrote this down very carefully in her watch log before pressing the alert key. The signature was large. 44 separate contact points, each one the size of a capital-class vessel, arranged in a precise geometric formation that the station's targeting AI classified as unknown. They were not moving. They were not transmitting. They were simply there, sitting at the far boundary of Earth's active detection range, in a formation that had no precedent in any military database the station had access to. Cora stared at the display for 10 seconds. Then she pressed the alert key and said, in the calm, flat voice that her training had given her, "Command, this is Wentworth on tactical. I have 44 unknown contacts at the boundary. Request immediate supervisor confirmation." The confirmation came in 40 seconds. By the time the supervisor reached the bridge, the contacts had not moved, had not changed formation, had not emitted anything detectable. They were just there. Holloway went to battle stations from his quarters at 3 in the morning. He was dressed in the command center in under 6 minutes, which was good time for a man his age, and the first thing he did when he reached the main display was look at the formation and say, very quietly, "How long have they been there?" "Sensors picked them up 41 minutes ago," the duty officer told him. No indication of how long they were outside detection range. Holloway looked at the formation for a long moment. It was the geometry that bothered him most. Military formations he understood. He had studied every major fleet engagement in the historical record going back 2 centuries. This was not a combat spread. It was not an escort configuration or a patrol line or a defensive screen. It was precise in a way that felt almost mathematical, like a diagram someone had drawn rather than a formation someone had chosen. It had a quality of deliberateness that was difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. "Get Voss," he said. Laura was already awake. She had been awake for 2 days, and she was in sublevel 4 running calibration sequences on the 5th emitter node when her comm buzzed with Holloway's direct line. She listened to the contact report without expression. "That's them," she said. "You sound calm," Holloway said. "I've been waiting for this for 22 years. I'm past the part where I panic." She looked across the lab at Patrick, who had heard the call and was already moving to his station. "How much time before they do anything?" "Unknown. They haven't moved. They won't move for a while. They never do. They wait." She thought about the data from the 164 events, the records from the civilizations that had managed to detect the fleet's arrival before their monitoring systems went dark. The approach was always the same. Arrive. Wait. Transmit. Fold. They're going to send a message. The same message they always send. After the message, they'll wait a little longer. I think it's a courtesy, though I'm not sure they'd use that word for it. And then they'll fire. How long? Days. Maybe a week. Probably not more than that. She was quiet for a moment. Jean, I need 4 days to finish the calibration on the remaining nodes. If you can give me 4 days without anyone getting near sublevel 4, I can give you a mirror that is ready to go when they fire. There was silence on the line. Not the silence of a man who was skeptical. The silence of a man who had run out of alternatives and was catching up to a decision he was not ready for. You've got 4 days, he said. Don't let me down. Laura set down the comm and looked at the emitter lattice in the center of the lab. A framework of carbon fiber arms and calibrated emitter housings that stood about 2 meters tall and looked, to anyone who did not know what it was, like a piece of abstract sculpture. 5 of the 7 nodes were live and synchronized. The 6th was 60% calibrated. The 7th was in pieces on the workbench. Patrick, she said. He was already looking at the 7th node. I know, he said. I'll start on the housing assembly now. Sleep first, she said. 3 hours. I mean it. You're no good to me if your hands aren't steady. He looked at her. When did you last sleep? She did not answer, which was its own answer. 4 hours, he said. We both go. Right now. And we come back sharp. She wanted to argue. She looked at the emitter lattice, at the math on the screens, at the timeline she had been running in her head since Holloway's call. Then she sat down in her chair and closed her eyes. 4 hours, she said. The message from the fleet came 19 hours later, broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously, picked up by every monitoring station and communication array in the solar system at the same moment. The station's linguistic AI processed it in 11 seconds. Lieutenant Cora Wentworth was on duty when it came through, and she read it on her display with the careful, neutral face of someone who is very deliberately not letting herself think about what the words mean. The message said, lay down your resistance architecture. The fold is prepared. Compliance reduces the duration of displacement. That was all. No identification. No demands beyond the first. No explanation of what the fold was or how long displacement would last or what compliance actually looked like in practice. Just those 3 sentences, delivered with the quiet confidence of a thing that had done this 164 times and had never once been answered in any meaningful way. Holloway read the translation in the command center. He read it twice. Then he asked his communications officer if there were any previous instances of this exact message on record. The answer came back from the archive query in 40 seconds. The message, word for word, translation for translation, had been transmitted by the same unknown source to 41 civilizations whose communication records had been partially preserved. The translation matched across all 41 instances with no variation at all. Holloway sat with that information for a moment. Then he called Laura. Same message, she said, before he could speak. I know. I got the archive alert. They've said this to 41 others. At least 41. Probably all 164. We just don't have the records for all of them. Her voice was steady. It's not a negotiation, Jean. It never was. It's a formality. They say the words because they always say the words. It doesn't change what comes after. What comes after, he repeated. They wait. Then they fire. A pause. We have 2 nodes left to calibrate. We'll be done in 30 hours. Tell your people on the bridge to watch for a change in the fleet's energy signature. When the formation starts drawing power, that's the firing sequence beginning. We'll need about 90 seconds warning to bring the mirror to full output. I'll have Wentworth watch for it personally, Holloway said. Good. Another pause, this one longer. Jean, when the time comes, don't fire back. I know every instinct your people have is going to tell them to shoot. Your weapons won't reach the ships. They'll have moved by then. Just hold position and let the mirror do what it's designed to do. And if the mirror doesn't work? Laura thought about the anchor point. She thought about the festival recording from the Dareth, the music, the violet sky, the crowd that had no idea what was about to happen. She thought about 164 lines on a map, all converging, all pointing here. It'll work, she said. She ended the call and looked at the emitter lattice. Patrick was at the workbench, his soldering tool, making a small, precise light in the dim of the lab, the 7th node taking shape under his hands. He worked with the focus of a man who has no attention left to spare for anything except what is directly in front of him. Laura walked to her station and pulled up the calibration sequence for the 6th node. The math was already there, clean and waiting. She had run this calculation in her head so many times over so many years that her fingers knew where to go before she told them. Outside, up above the layers of concrete and steel and 100 meters of ordinary air, the 44 ships of the fleet that had erased 164 civilizations sat in their perfect geometric formation and waited the way they always waited, with the patience of something that had never once been wrong about how this was going to end. Laura began to calibrate the 6th node. She did not hurry. There was no point in hurrying. The math was either right or it was not, and rushing did not make math more right. She moved through the sequence with the same deliberate steadiness she had carried through every important moment of her professional life. The same steadiness she had discovered in herself at 22, sitting in a university office being told that the anchor point was gone and the investigation would take time, and finding, somewhere beneath the shock and the grief, a part of her that was already asking questions. 31 hours later, the 7th node came online. All 7 emitters synchronized for the first time, humming together at the resonance frequency she had spent 15 years identifying, filling sub-level 4 with a sound that was not quite sound, more of a sensation in the bones, like standing near something very large that was holding itself very still. Patrick leaned back in his chair and exhaled. His eyes were red at the rims from too many hours at close work, and there was a small burn on the back of his left hand from the soldering tool that he had not mentioned. He looked at the readout on his screen for a long time. All 7, he said. All 7, Laura confirmed. He looked at her. How are you doing? She thought about how to answer that. She had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in 4 days. Her back hurt. Her coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, and she had been drinking it cold for 2 hours without noticing. Somewhere above her, in a city full of people who did not know what was sitting at the edge of their solar system, the sun had risen and was probably making the morning look normal and fine. I'm ready, she said. Patrick nodded. He knew better than to push past that answer with her, especially now. Laura turned back to the emitter lattice and began the final calibration check. She went through each node in sequence, verifying the output frequency, the synchronization timing, the directional alignment. It took 40 minutes. Every reading was correct. She was on the last verification when her comm buzzed. It was Cora Wentworth's voice, and the young officer was using the careful flat tone that people use when they're trying very hard not to sound frightened. Dr. Voss, this is Wentworth on Tactical. The fleet's energy signature is changing. Admiral Holloway asked me to notify you directly. I'm reading a coordinated power buildup across all 44 contacts. It started about 3 minutes ago, and it's still climbing. Laura's hand had stopped moving. 90 seconds, she said. Tell the Admiral 90 seconds. Understood. Dr. Voss, the formation is moving. Or I thought it was. The sensor AI is now flagging the formation as a pause, as a projection. The actual contacts are showing up 40,000 kilometers closer on the secondary array. They were cloaked. They were closer the whole time. I know, Laura said. It's all right. It doesn't matter how close they are. It doesn't change anything. She looked at Patrick. He was already at his station, hands on the mirror's output controls, watching the synchronization display. All 7 nodes were green. All 7 were holding. She looked at the emitter lattice one more time. 2 meters of carbon and calibrated metal, filled with 15 years of math and 22 years of waiting. It did not look like much. It never did. Mirror to full output, she said. Now, the hum in the bones of the room went up a note. The synchronization display lit steady green across all 7 channels. Laura looked at the resonance output reading, watched the number climb to exactly where she had calculated it needed to be, and held it there. The comm came alive with the sound of the tactical bridge, someone saying something fast and loud about an energy discharge, about the primary sensor array going white, about the defensive grid. Hold position, Laura said into the comm, loud and clear, the same tone she used for everything important. Do not fire. Do not move. Hold position and let it come. There was a moment, less than a second, probably, though it felt longer, when nothing happened. Then the displacement beam hit the outer edge of the resonance field. and the mirror came alive. The display on Lieutenant Cora Wentworth's console went completely white. Not overloaded, not glitched. White the way a piece of paper is white. Clean and total and absolute. Every sensor reading, every contact marker, every energy signature on the tactical board wiped out simultaneously, as if someone had taken a cloth and swept the screen clear. She had been watching the displacement beam travel across the last few thousand kilometers toward Earth's orbital grid, and then there was a fraction of a second where nothing existed on her instruments at all, and then the white resolved back into data. The 44 contacts were gone. Cora checked the secondary array. She checked the backup sensor feed. She rerouted the detection query through the deep-range antenna cluster on the station's far side, which had its own power supply and its own processing unit, and which had never given a false reading in 14 months of her posting. All three systems agreed completely. The fleet was not there. She sat very still for a moment. Around her, the other officers on the tactical bridge were doing the same thing. All of them looking at their own displays, all of them running their own checks. None of them saying anything yet because none of them knew what to say. The communication board was lit up with incoming queries from every monitoring station in the solar system. The station's own alert system was still flashing red from the battle station's call. The ventilation fans hummed. Someone's coffee mug was sitting on the edge of console, and in the silence, it was the loudest thing in the room. Cora opened her watch log and typed carefully and precisely. Enemy fleet. No longer present. She stared at what she had written for a moment. It did not feel like enough. It also felt like exactly the right amount. She left it as it was. Down in sublevel 4, the resonance mirror was still running at full output. The emitter nodes were warm. Not dangerously so, but warm in the way that things get warm when they have done something large and real and are still holding the result of it. The synchronization display showed all 7 channels still locked at the resonance frequency. The output reading sitting steady at the number Laura had calibrated it to hold. Laura was standing at her station looking at the readings. She had not moved since the beam hit the field. She was not sure how long that had been. Her body did not seem interested in volunteering the information. Patrick was at his own console, and he was making a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and someone trying very hard not to cry. He had both hands pressed flat on the desk in front of him, fingers spread, as if he needed to feel something solid. It worked, he said. Laura looked at the resonance output reading. She looked at the 4th-axis vector display, which was showing the inversion signature she had calculated. The displaced field redirected back along its own carrier wave, aimed at the ships that had fired it. She looked at the position data from the deep-range sensors, which confirmed that 44 capital-class vessels had folded out of normal space at the exact coordinates where the fleet had been stationed. It worked, she said. There was a difference in the way they said it. Patrick said it like a man who had survived something. Laura said it like a woman checking a result against a prediction she had made 22 years ago and finding them in agreement. She sat down slowly in her chair. Not because she was tired, though she was. Because something that had been held very tightly inside her for a very long time had just gone quiet, and sitting down felt like the honest response to that. Her comm buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it started buzzing continuously, which meant the command center was trying to reach her on multiple channels at once. She reached over and opened the primary channel. Holloway's voice came through first. Voss. That was all he said for a moment. Just her name, in a tone she had not heard from him before. Not the measured authority of a man running a command center, and not the careful skepticism he had used with her in briefings. Just a voice that was processing something it had not been prepared for. The contacts are gone, she said. All 44. The inversion worked. They're in the fold. A pause. In the fold, he repeated. The same pocket dimension they used on the others. The beam came through the mirror's resonance field, and the 4th-axis vector inverted on contact. It went back the way it came and wrapped around the ships that fired it. She looked at the vector display again. They folded themselves, Jean. The mirror just showed them which direction to go. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear activity in the background of the command center. People moving quickly, voices overlapping, the sound of a room that was trying to figure out what it had just witnessed. Are they dead? Holloway asked. No, the fold preserves everything inside it. They're in the same state as every civilization they displaced, suspended, frozen in the moment of the fold. They can't move. They can't communicate. They can't do anything. She paused. They're not dead. They're stored. Stored, he said. It's what they did to everyone else, Laura said. There was no satisfaction in her voice when she said it. It was simply a fact, delivered flatly, the way she delivered most facts. She heard Holloway exhale, a long, slow breath that carried the weight of a man who had spent the last several weeks preparing for a battle he did not understand and had just watched someone else fight it in a basement laboratory with equipment bought through academic purchasing channels. She thought he might say something about that. He did not. Come up, he said. I need to talk to you in person. Give me 20 minutes. She cut the channel and looked at Patrick. He had stopped making the sound between a laugh and not crying. He was just sitting now, looking at the synchronization display with the expression of a man who has completed a project that consumed years of his life and does not yet know what to do with his hands. 20 minutes, she said. Then we go up. He nodded. Neither of them moved for most of those 20 minutes. The emitter lattice hummed. The display readings held steady. The coffee that Laura had made several hours ago was still in its mug on the corner of her desk, cold and forgotten and unremarkable. It was Patrick who noticed the anomaly. He had been watching the fold coordinate display out of habit. The point in space where the fleet had been when it vanished, now showing only the clean resonance signature of successful inversion. He noticed the number in the bottom right corner of the display, a value he had been tracking for months as part of the calibration work, and he noticed that the number was changing. Laura, he said. Something in his voice made her look immediately. The fold stability index was dropping. It had been at 0.94 when the inversion completed, a high and healthy number, well within the range her calculations had predicted for a stable displacement pocket. Now, it was at 0.81. While she watched, it dropped to 0.79. The dimension wasn't designed to hold that much mass, Laura said. She was already at her calculation console, pulling up the structural modeling software she had built as part of the resonance research. The Vorrkai designed the fold to hold biological matter, populations, crews, things with relatively low mass. Their own fleet is in there now. 44 capital ships. The structural stress of that mass on the pocket's internal geometry. How bad? Patrick asked. She ran the numbers. She ran them twice because the first result did not seem possible, and then she checked the inputs and ran them a third time. If the index drops below 0.40, the pocket begins a compression event, she said. Inward collapse. Everything inside it gets compressed out of existence. No suspension, no preservation. Gone. She looked at the current reading. 0.74 and still falling. At this rate of decline, we have about 14 hours. Patrick was very quiet for a moment. 14 hours to do what, exactly? To open the fold from the outside and pull everyone out before the compression threshold. She said in the same tone she used for everything, calm and flat and precise. But she was already standing up, already moving toward the mirror's output console. Can a mirror do that? Patrick asked. Not in its current configuration. The mirror is set up to intercept and invert. To open the fold from the outside, I need to reconfigure the output array to generate a sustained extraction field instead of a reflective one. She looked at the emitter lattice. The 7 nodes were still warm from the inversion. It's the same resonance frequency. The math is the same. I just need to redirect the output from reflective to generative. How long to reconfigure? 6 hours. Maybe 7. Which leaves 7 hours to run the extraction before the compression threshold. Yes. She paused. But the extraction won't take 7 hours. Once the fold is open, the displaced matter will come through on its own. The pocket dimension pushes outward when it has an exit. Depending on how much is in there, the extraction itself should take less than an hour. Patrick looked at the stability index. 0.70 now. You should tell Holloway. I know, she said. Go up and brief him. Tell him everything I just told you, exactly as I said it. And tell him I need his engineering teams to give me access to the station's power relay for the mirror's output nodes. I'm going to need more power than the research division supply line can handle for the extraction field. Where will you be? Here, she said, starting the reconfiguration. He left. She stayed. The first hour of the reconfiguration was the kind of work that required her complete attention and got it. Pulling the output parameters from the reflected configuration, rebuilding the directional array algorithm from the base equations, recalibrating the synchronization timing across all 7 nodes for a generative rather than intercept function. It was technical and demanding, and it occupied every part of her mind that could be occupied by technical and demanding work. The part that could not be occupied that way was thinking about her father. She had known, from the moment she confirmed the fold had successfully inverted, that the anchor point was in there. She had known it for 22 years as a theory. The ship went dark, the quantum echo matched, the math pointed to displacement rather than destruction. She had built 15 years of research on that conclusion and never once let herself treat it as anything more than a scientific premise, because treating it as anything more would have made her something other than a scientist. It would have made her a daughter who needed something, and a daughter who needed something could not do the work that needed to be done. But the fold was open now, or would be in a few hours, and the anchor point was in there, and her father was in there, and in the moment of his disappearance, he had been laughing with a ship cook about a bad stew, and from his perspective, no time at all had passed. She stopped working. She had not planned to stop. Her hands simply went still on the console, and she found herself sitting there in the quiet hum of the lab with her eyes not quite focused on anything, and the thought that she had kept below the surface of everything for 22 years came up all the way for the first time. He might come back, not as a theory, not as a premise, as a real thing. A man walking out of a recovery bay, confused about the year, looking for a familiar face. She had not cried about her father since she was 23, the year after it happened, when she had decided that the grief was not going to be useful to her unless she turned it into something, and she had turned it into the work, and the work had become her life. The grief was still there. It had always been there. She had just never allowed it to be anything other than fuel. She sat in the empty lab and let it be something else for a while. It was not dramatic. She did not make any sound. She just sat very still and let herself feel the weight of 22 years of hoping for something she had never admitted to hoping for, and the terrifying possibility that the hope was about to be answered. The possibility was almost harder to hold than the grief had been. Grief she knew. She had built an entire career inside grief. Hope was something different, something with edges she did not know the shape of yet. After a while, she exhaled. Then she straightened in her chair and looked at the console. The reconfiguration was roughly 30% complete. She had work to do. She went back to work. Patrick returned 2 hours later with 3 engineers from the station's power relay team and a message from Holloway. The relay access was authorized. The engineers would do whatever she asked, and Holloway himself would be in sub-level 4 within the hour. Patrick also brought sandwiches, which Laura ate mechanically while continuing to type, because Patrick had learned long ago that telling her to stop and eat was ineffective, and giving her food she could eat while doing something else worked much better. The engineers connected the mirror's output nodes to the station's main power relay, while Laura walked them through the extraction field specifications. They were good at their jobs. They did not ask unnecessary questions. The connection was complete in 40 minutes. Holloway arrived while Laura was running the output test on the reconfigured array. He stood at the edge of the lab and looked at the emitter lattice the way he had looked at the fleet formation on the sensor display, with the careful attention of a man trying to understand something that is outside the boundaries of what he was trained to understand. He did not speak until she finished the test sequence. The stability index is at 0.61, he said. I know. We have about 9 hours left before the compression threshold. She looked at the output test results. All 7 nodes were holding the new configuration. The extraction field parameters were within the expected range. The reconfiguration is about 80% complete. Another 2 hours and we can start the extraction. Holloway walked farther into the lab and stood near the emitter lattice, looking at it from close up. He was a tall man, and the lattice came up to his chest. He reached out and almost touched one of the emitter housings, then stopped and put his hand down. I read your original paper, he said. The one from 6 years ago. The one about the resonance echo. I know. It was on your office reading list. I didn't understand most of it. He was quiet for a moment. I understood enough to know you weren't guessing. I just didn't understand enough to know what to do with it. He looked at the lattice. I should have given you the resources. Proper ones. A real project team and a real budget and a real facility. Laura looked at him. This was not something she had expected him to say, and she was not immediately sure how to respond to it. She decided to respond honestly. Yes, she said. You should have. He accepted that without flinching. What happens when the fold opens? The displaced matter comes through. In order of compression proximity, the things nearest the collapse edge will come out first, then progressively inward. There will be ships from 164 civilizations, including the Vorrkai fleet. The biological matter will be in suspension and will need immediate medical assessment. The people will be alive but disoriented. They'll be experiencing the moment of their disappearance. For them, nothing happened. 1 second they were there, and then they'll be here, and they won't know why. How do we handle 164 civilizations coming back in a normal space at once? We don't immediately. We open the fold, we let the extraction run, and we do the best we can with what we have in the next few hours. The long-term coordination is going to take years. She paused. Earth is going to be the convening point for everything that comes out of that fold. There is no other option. We're the ones with the technology and the location and the current year. Holloway thought about that for a moment. That's a large responsibility. Yes, Laura said. It is. But it's also a large opportunity. Every civilization the Vorrkai ever displaced is going to come back at the same time, and they're all going to know what happened to them, and none of them are going to be happy about it. Humanity will have been the ones who opened the door. That means something. It means we'll be very busy for a long time, Holloway said. Yes, she agreed. That too. He looked at her for a moment. Your father's ship. The anchor point. Is it in there? Laura held his gaze. Yes. He did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the emitter lattice again, and then at the stability index display on the wall, and then back at her. His expression had shifted into something quieter and more personal than anything she had seen from him across a conference table. I'm sorry it took this long, he said. For you. Laura looked at the console. 2 more hours, she said. Then we open it. Patrick appeared at her shoulder with the second half of sandwich she had apparently put down and forgotten, and she took it without looking and kept working. The final 20 minutes of the reconfiguration were the most precise. The extraction field had to be opened at exactly the right resonance frequency. Too low and the fold would not respond, too high and the inversion would repeat instead of extracting, which would push the displaced matter deeper into the collapsing pocket, rather than pulling it out. Laura went through the final parameter set manually, checking each value against her original calculations, making small adjustments. Where the reconfiguration had introduced tiny deviations. The stability index was at 0.48 when she finished. The compression threshold was 0.40. The gap between them felt very narrow. Ready? Patrick asked. Laura looked at the output display. All 7 nodes were holding. The extraction field parameters were set. The power relay connection was stable. The resonance frequency was correct to 6 decimal places. Ready, she said. She initiated the extraction sequence. The emitter lattice went from warm to hot in about 8 seconds. Not dangerously, but visibly, the housings radiating enough heat that the air directly above them shimmered slightly. The sound in the room changed. The hum went from a bone-deep vibration to something higher and more active, like the difference between an engine idling and an engine working. On the fold coordinate display, the stability index stopped falling. It held at 0.47 for 3 seconds. It began to rise. Upstairs, on the tactical bridge of the orbital station, Cora Wentworth was the first person to see what happened next. The deep-range sensors registered the first contact at the fold coordinates. A single vessel, tumbling slowly in the space where the Vorrkai fleet had been, its hull design unlike anything in the station's identification database. It was followed 3 seconds later by 2 more, then 7 at once, then a cluster of 14 that appeared so suddenly the sensor board flagged it as an error before confirming all 14 contacts as real. Then the space at the fold coordinates opened up completely, and they came through all at once. Cora had no useful word for what she was watching. The numbers on her display kept climbing. 40, 80, 112, 160, and still more. A stream of vessels of every size and configuration pouring out of a point in space that the sensors described as a sustained dimensional aperture, each ship tumbling slowly in the zero gravity of open space. None of them yet moving under their own power because every crew inside them was still catching up to the fact that they existed in normal space again. And then the Vorrkai fleet came through. 44 capital ships, larger than anything else in the stream, appearing in a loose cluster that had none of the geometric precision of their original formation. They were clearly intact. The fold had preserved them perfectly, just as it had preserved everyone else. But they were surrounded now on every side by the ships of the civilizations they had taken, and their weapons were offline, and the Earth's defense grid was fully active, and there was nowhere for them to go that did not point towards someone they had wronged. Cora wrote in her log, "Enemy fleet recovered from fold. Currently stationary. No hostile action detected." Then she added, "Other recovered vessels. Still counting." In sublevel 4, the stability index climbed back through 0.60, past 0.70, past 0.80. The fold coordinate display showed the pocket dimension shrinking in an orderly way as matter transferred back into normal space. Not collapsing violently, but emptying, like water draining through an open pipe. The extraction field held steady. All 7 nodes held steady. Laura stood at her console and watched the numbers and did not look away. Patrick was watching the contact feed from the tactical bridge, which Holloway had routed to a secondary display in the lab. He was reading out the count in a low voice as if he needed to hear the numbers to believe them. 212, he said. 240. 260. He paused. Laura, 260 ships. She did not respond. She was watching the stability index. 290. 304. His voice had changed. It had gone quieter and slower, the way voices go when the brain is struggling to process what the eyes are seeing. 340. They're still coming. The stability index reached 0.91 and began to level off. The rate of transfer was slowing as the pocket neared empty. The stream of contacts on the tactical display thinned from dozens per minute to clusters to individual ships appearing at long intervals. Holloway's voice came through the comm boss. The recovery stations are overwhelmed. We have ships coming through with no power, no comm, crews in suspension. We're bringing people in from every available docking arm, and the overflow is going to need. I know, she said. Do what you can. Triage by life support status. Ships with functional life support first, then bring in the ones running on emergency reserves. The suspension will keep everyone stable until we reach them, but it's not indefinite. Understood. A pause. The manifest system is picking up registry numbers from the incoming ships as they clear the fold. Your father's vessel is on the list. Laura's hands did not move. Her eyes did not move. The stability index was at 0.93. We're in the queue, she said, near the end of the stream. It's coming through in the next few minutes. All right, she said. Tell the recovery team to give it docking arm 7. I want medical team standing by. Already done, Holloway said, and closed the channel. Patrick looked at her. She did not look back. She was watching the fold coordinate display, with a stream of contact that slowed to almost nothing. One ship every 20 seconds now, then every 40, then 60. The pocket dimension was nearly empty. The stability index read 0.95. The extraction field was still running, still holding, still pointing at the coordinates where the fold had been. One more coming through, Patrick said, reading the contact feed. Hull configuration matches a survey-class science vessel, mid-sized. Registry number matches. Turn the extraction field to standby, Laura said. Patrick executed the command. The hum in the room dropped back to the lower idle frequency. The emitter nodes cooled by several degrees in about 30 seconds. The fold coordinate display showed the dimensional aperture shrinking down to a point and then closing, a clean, complete closure, no residual distortion, nothing left behind. The stability index read 0.97. That's every one, Patrick said. Laura looked at the display for a long moment. Then she looked at the emitter lattice, the framework of carbon and calibrated metal that had been the whole project, the whole 22 years, the whole reason she had sat in archive rooms at 4 in the morning and argued with funding committees and spent weekends alone in a lab while the rest of her life happened somewhere else without her. It was still standing exactly as they had built it. The nodes were cooling. The synchronization display was powering down. "Shut it down," she said. "All systems." Patrick powered down the mirror in sequence, one node at a time. The hum faded until there was nothing left but the ventilation fans and the ordinary quiet of a room that had done something extraordinary and was now just a room again. Laura picked up her coat from the back of her chair. She had not worn it in 3 days. She put it on. "I'm going to docking arm 7, she said. Patrick stood up. "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know." He fell into step beside her as she walked to the door. The elevator up from sublevel 4 was slow, the way freight elevators always are, and they rode in silence. When it opened on the main level, the building was louder than it had been in weeks. People moving quickly in every corridor, comm calls happening in offices with the doors open, the particular organized noise of an institution that is dealing with something much larger than it was built for. They walked to the connector bridge that linked the research division to the orbital station's docking complex, and then through 2 security checkpoints where the guards recognized Laura and waved her through without making her wait. At the entrance to the docking arm corridor, a medical team was staged with 2 gurneys and a full diagnostic kit. The lead medic, a compact woman named Dr. Frances Obi, looked up when Laura arrived. "Ship is docked," Frances said. "Crew life support is functional. We're reading 31 biological signatures on the internal scan. All readings consistent with active suspension, heart rate, neural activity. Everything is present but slow. They're going to come out of it on their own once we equalize the environmental systems." "How long?" Laura asked. 10 minutes. Maybe 15. The suspension dissolves naturally when atmospheric conditions normalize. Laura nodded. Frances looked at her with the careful expression of a medical professional who is trying to decide how much to say about something personal. She decided not to say anything, which was the right call. "We'll be right outside," Frances said, and stepped back to give Laura space. Laura walked to the observation window at the side of the docking arm corridor and looked through the reinforced glass at the anchor point. It was smaller than she remembered from the photographs. She had been 22 the last time she had seen images of it. A standard mid-sized survey vessel, functional and plain, designed for practical work rather than appearance. 22 years of looking at it only in data files and archive records had somehow made it larger in her mind. In reality, sitting docked at the arm with its running lights cycling through the startup sequence as the ship's systems came back online, it looked like exactly what it was, a working science vessel that had been doing a routine job and had not come home. She stood at the window and looked at it for a long time. She thought about the evening she had spoken to her father for the last time. She in the communication room at the Titan research station, him on the ship, the lag on the signal making the conversation slightly stilted the way those calls always were. He had been complaining about the stew. She had been pretending to care more about the stew than she did because it was making him laugh, and she liked the sound of him laughing. At the end of the call, he had told her to eat properly and sleep enough, the 2 things he always said at the end of every call, as if those were the only pieces of parental advice he trusted himself to still give now that she was grown. She had rolled her eyes and told him she always did both. He had made a face that said he did not believe her. Then the signal had cut for the scheduled close, and that had been that, and 4 days later the anchor point was gone. The observation window showed her a ship that looked like it had never been gone at all. There was no corrosion, no damage, no sign of elapsed time. The hull markings were as clean as the day the vessel launched. Whatever the fold had done, it had preserved the ship perfectly, frozen it exactly as it had been the moment before it vanished, which meant that inside, everything was also exactly as it had been, including the people. Patrick appeared at her shoulder, and said nothing. He had a talent for presence without pressure, for being there without requiring anything from the moment. She had always appreciated that about him. The docking arm light changed from amber to green. The ship's atmospheric system had equalized. Francis appeared at the edge of the corridor and spoke quietly. "Dr. Voss, the suspension is resolving. They'll be aware in about 3 minutes." Laura looked at the door at the end of the docking arm. It was a plain door, metal frame, pressure seal, a handle worn smooth from use. She had looked at more significant-looking doors in her life. She had never looked at a door this long before opening it. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Patrick asked. "No," she said. "Thank you." She walked to the end of the docking arm. She stopped at the door. The handle was cold when she touched it, the way metal is always cold in the station environment. Inside, she could hear the sound of people waking up. Voices, not words, just the tone of voices that are confused and asking questions that have not been answered yet. Someone said something that sounded like a question about the ship's position. Someone else answered them. A third voice said something that ended with the word outside. Laura breathed in and breathed out. She had spent 22 years building the road back to this door. She had given up things she could not now name and would not want to tally. She had argued in rooms where no one believed her, and worked in labs where no one helped her, and lived inside a grief that she had never once allowed to be just grief, because grief without a project was something she could not afford to be. She thought about what it would look like when she opened the door. Her father, sitting somewhere inside the anchor point, probably at a table or in a corridor, trying to figure out why the ship's displays were showing a docking arm he did not recognize in a station he had not approached. Older than he remembered himself, looking around for something familiar. He would look up when the door opened. She pulled a handle. The door swung inward, and the light and sound of the anchor point's interior came out to meet her. The recycled air smell of a ship that had been sealed a long time. The hum of systems coming back online. The voices of 31 people who had blinked out of one moment and into another without feeling the gap between them. She could see the corridor beyond the entrance, and the faces of the crew turning toward the door, expressions shifting from confusion to surprise to something else when they saw a person standing there who was not a member of their crew. Her father was at the far end of the corridor. He was older than the photographs, or he looked it for a moment until she realized she was older too, and she was seeing him through 22 years of that rather than through his. He was standing near a door frame with his hand against the wall, looking toward the entrance, and when his eyes found her face, they went through recognition in stages. The way recognition works when a person is trying to place a face that is familiar but wrong somehow, wrong in a way that does not make sense yet. Then he placed it. He said her name the way he always had. Not her full name, not formal, just a short version that meant she was his and he knew her. His voice was the same. It was exactly the same. Laura walked down the corridor toward him. She did not say anything yet. There was too much to say, and none of it was going to start well if she tried to say it all at once. She walked the length of the corridor and stopped in front of him and looked at him for a moment. This man who had been frozen in a fraction of a second for 22 years while she built an entire life around the math of getting him back. He looked at her face. He looked at the gray that had started to come in at her temples. His expression moved through something that was not quite confusion and not quite sorrow and not quite relief, but had parts of all three. And then he said quietly, "How long?" 22 years, she said. He took that in. He was a practical man, a scientist himself, and practical scientists take things in rather than reacting to them, at least at first. He nodded slowly, once processing it. "Are you all right?" he said. She almost laughed. 22 years. And his first question was whether she was all right. She thought about everything that had happened in those 22 years, the research and the arguments and the archive rooms and the long nights in the lab and the grief that she had carried so carefully and so quietly for so long. She thought about the mirror and the fleet and the 164 lines on the map that had all led here. She thought about Patrick in the elevator and Francis in the corridor and Holloway in the briefing room and Cora Wentworth writing no longer present in her watch log with the understatement of someone who had just run out of adequate words. She thought about the moment she had first found the resonance echo, 22 years old, sitting at a data terminal on the Titan station, looking at the quantum field distortion in her father's last transmission and thinking, this is not instrument malfunction. This is a message. I just have to learn what it says. Yes, she said. I'm all right. Her father looked at her for another moment. Then he reached out and put his arms around her, the way a parent does when the situation is larger than words. And Laura let herself be held for the first time in 22 years without checking to make sure the world was still running correctly while she was not watching it. For the next several months, it was more than running. It was reorganizing itself into something it had never been before, a gathering place, a convening ground, a center of something that had no good name yet because it had never existed before. Ships from 164 civilizations needed places to dock, and people to talk to, and answers to questions that were going to take years to answer properly. The Vorrkai were held in custody pending a process that no existing law quite covered, which meant that new law had to be written, which meant that humans were writing galactic law for the first time in history, and doing it in conference rooms that were not big enough, and with translation systems that needed constant adjustment. Holloway ran the military coordination with the same practical bluntness he ran everything. And he was better at it than Laura would have expected, partly because he had the sense to ask for help when he needed it and the authority to make things happen when they did not move fast enough on their own. He gave formal credit to the research division at every public briefing, on the record, in full uniform, without hedging. It was the most useful thing he did in the entire period, because it meant that the institutions that had ignored Laura's work for 15 years could not easily pretend they had not ignored it. Patrick went back to the lab. The mirror needed to be documented properly. Every calculation, every calibration choice, every modification made in the final hours. The technology belonged to everyone now, or would once the documentation was complete and published. He worked on it steadily, without rushing, in the same methodical way he did everything, occasionally eating the food that someone left at the lab door. Laura spent 3 weeks overseeing the initial coordination effort, then handed the day-to-day management to a joint committee and stepped back. She was not a committee person, and the committee knew it, and everyone was quietly relieved when she removed herself from the daily meetings and returned to the research division. There was a paper she had been meaning to write for 12 years. A proper, complete paper. Not the preliminary work she had published before, not the truncated version she had submitted to committees that did not read them carefully, but the full account of the resonance echo research from the beginning to the end, with all the data and all the methodology and all the results, including the results from the inversion and the extraction. It would be the definitive record of how humanity had found the pattern that 164 civilizations missed and built the tool that reversed it and opened the door that everyone else had been locked behind. She sat down at her desk in sublevel 4 on a morning in early spring, when the light through the narrow window was the pale yellow of a season that was just beginning to believe in itself, and she opened a new document, and she started writing from the first day. She wrote, "The archive room on sublevel 2 of the United Earth Research Division had 164 entries on its main display. Each one was a civilization that had gone quiet." She read it back. She made one small change. Then she kept going.